Greetings, my wonderful students. Today we begin our discussion of the Protestant Reformation. This was a major change in history. It was the splitting of the Catholic Church. I want you to take a good look at this map for a minute. You can see over here, this color is Catholic, which you see in the northern part of France, all of Spain, all of Portugal, and almost all of the Italian states at the time. And then you begin to see other colors in here. Lutheran here in the Holy Roman Empire, the Calvinists in southern France, and also you're seeing the spread of the Anglican Church here in England, the Anabaptists, the Bohemians, the Eastern Orthodox, which of course you can see all the way over here in the orange, Islamic as well. You can see that there's a lot of shading in different areas, which show a mixture of different religious beliefs in these regions. And this is part of the thing, where Catholic, Lutheran, Calvinist, Anglican, Anabaptist, all had originally been Catholic. How did all of these different new religious groups appear? That's the Protestant Reformation, and it makes a huge change in Europe. So it starts off with the criticism of the church that we had discussed in the Middle Ages. Some church officials were corrupt, and the church seemed to be more concerned with money rather than salvation. To raise money, the church sold something that was called indulgences, a pardon from sin. So basically think of it like this. The church, in order to raise money to build some of these cathedrals or basilicas, basically said, let's do a little theology first. According to some of the Catholic teachings, it was the idea that if you died, you didn't necessarily go straight to heaven. That if you had done some bad stuff and you needed to pay for that. So you went into a place called purgatory. And then after spending a large amount of time in purgatory, which was basically supposed to be kind of like hell, but not going to be forever, after you spent enough time to pay for your sins there, you would then go on to heaven. So you could spend hundreds or thousands of years in purgatory. So the idea was, the church said, if you give us some money, we'll knock off a few years for you in purgatory. And as you might guess, some individuals, Martin Luther, not to be confused with Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther had a problem with this and said the church really doesn't have any control over God's forgiveness. So saying that the church can knock off a few years in purgatory for you is saying that the church could tell God, hey, you need to let these guys out of purgatory a little early. That's where the problem comes in. So Martin Luther was a Christian monk. He'd been studying as a member of the clergy. He believed that salvation came through faith and that church ceremonies were unnecessary. He posted his list of 95 theses statements about why indulgences were wrong. Now, he had written letters about this before, wanting things to be changed. The church had not changed it. The printing press is a major part of this at this point, because other people had questioned the power of the church before. But Martin Luther had his ideas, his 95 statements about indulgences. They were printed and they were disseminated. They were spread throughout Europe, which is going to spread his ideas. The church denounced him. They said, Martin Luther, you're wrong. And they ordered him to recant, which basically means that they ordered him to say, admit you're wrong and we'll forgive you. Now, Martin Luther refused and went into hiding. And he translated the Bible from Latin. All the Bibles back then were in Latin. All the church services were in Latin at this point. He translates it into German, which is the common language of where he was, because he was a German monk. And he began printing it. And he felt that it was necessary for individuals to read the Bible themselves and to interpret it themselves, not the church. Now, the ability to print his ideas led to their rapid spread, as I've already stated. Without the printing press, the Protestant Reformation might not have occurred. It might just have been another group of individuals who challenged the church, but their ideas really didn't go very far. Now, Luther's followers ended up forming their own church, and it's still in existence today. It's called the Lutheran Church. Now, he's not the only person to question the power of the church at this time. As his ideas are spreading, other people are speaking up against the church. John Calvin formed a group of Christians called Calvinists, and his group preached predestination. the belief that God chose who would be saved before the beginning of time. Now, this is based on the idea that God is all-knowing and all-powerful, so therefore God, when he created the universe, knew exactly who would end up being saved and who would not be saved. And so there's really no way for you to save yourself, and it's already been decided ahead of time, but that you could tell who was going to be saved through the way they acted. Henry VIII also challenged the church, but he did so for a different reason. He wanted a divorce. He wanted an end to a marriage with his wife. The Pope would not allow him to have it, so he ended up splitting from the Catholic Church and forming the Church of England so that he could then get a divorce and marry another person. He had 6 wives in all over the course of his life. Now, the Catholic Church realized there was a problem. As the Protestant Reformation began to spread, as more and more people began to question their teachings, the power of the church as an organization began to decrease. So the church wanted to stop losing followers. And in an attempt to do that, they started what was called the Counter-Reformation to try and fix some of their issues. They stopped the sale of indulgences, and they banned Protestant books and pamphlets to stop the spread of Protestantism. So what they're effectively doing with stopping the sale of indulgences is they're kind of admitting that it's a bad idea. It's kind of hard to defend. Now, by trying to ban Protestant books and pamphlets, they're trying to stop the spread of Protestant ideas. It's basically a form of censorship. And it's actually the same sort of thing that a totalitarian government or a dictator like Hitler would do in the 20th century. If they can control what you hear, they can control what you think. And that was the concept here. Now, this leads to the Inquisition. Now, the Inquisition was a Catholic a church practice that was designed to stamp out heresy. Heresy was, of course, going against church doctrine. So you can bet that Protestants were considered heretics because they disagreed with church teaching. Now, the Inquisition originally was designed to stomp out heresies from earlier years, but with Protestantism, it fires up all over again. It was also used against people who were accused of witchcraft. And of course, if you were accused of witchcraft and found guilty, you could be burned at the stake, as in this picture here. So the church is trying to use this to stomp out Protestantism. And the loss of followers to Protestantism slowed. So even though it was a horrific practice, it seemed to be effective in stopping the Protestant Reformation. So you have to ask yourself, thinking back to the Renaissance, would Machiavelli have agreed that this was an effective program? And even though it's horrific, Machiavelli would have said, well, the ends justify the means. Now, the effects of this religious upheaval. In an attempt to convince each people that they were right, the Protestants began to teach people how to read and write. And the Catholics began to teach people how to read and write. And they did this so that they can read and write the different pamphlets, the different lines of argument and reasoning as to why each side believed they were correct. Many different churches formed. As you guys already saw at the very beginning of this particular slideshow, there were a number of different churches, and there are even more today. The power of the Catholic Church decreased, where before they were collecting a tax on all the people of Western Europe. As less and less people began to show up to their churches and instead went to different churches, the money that the Catholic Church received had gone down. And the fact that before many kings obeyed popes, now more and more kings are challenging the power of the church, which also means the power of the kings grew, because now kings had more power inside their own countries, and in some cases, such as Henry VIII, forming their own churches with themselves as the head. So these are the effects of the religious upheaval, and it's going to create shockwaves throughout Europe for hundreds of years. And that is the end of this review.